The nonprofit MBA purpose is to provide new business insights and fresh creative ideas for executive directors and their teams that will help them improve their organization. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. Good morning. My name is Stephen Halasnik. I'll be your host for today's Nonprofit MBA podcast, as I have been for the last several years. And for those of you who don't know me after all these podcasts, you should know me by now, but a lot of times it's the first time people are listening. And I am the co-founder of Financing Solutions. And since 2012, you may not know that there is a company that specifically works with nonprofits. We provide a line of credit to them. We are a direct funder. We do not work. We're not a broker. We don't work with, other institutions. It is our money that we're providing and lending out to nonprofits, and we have a great line of credit. It's very popular, 5-star rated, that is used often by nonprofits to help manage cash flow. So if you're interested in learning more about it, please visit our website at nonprofitmbapodcast.com. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Janine San Luis from Win Women. And she goes by the nickname of Yanni, and that's what I'll be hopefully calling her today. Yanni is the CEO and founder of Win Women. And she has worked with mission-driven organizations like the AARP, Latin Grammy Culture Foundation, Teach for America, and other national nonprofits. Yanni has led high-impact training for boards, staff, and funders, and spoken at many events and industry leadership forums. Her work has helped nonprofits secure millions in funding, strengthen donor engagement, and elevate their organization's impact. In essence, the Win Woman firm has nonprofit CEOs win in raising money for their organization. Yanni, welcome to today's Nonprofit MBA podcast.
I appreciate it, Stephen. It's so great to be here with you and your listeners.
Yanni, are you mostly working with larger organizations, or are you sometimes working with a smaller nonprofit?
So we do a combination of things, right? It's a matter of where the nonprofit exists and what's happening in the game. As you know, right now with nonprofits, there's a lot of, it's funny, the word uncertainty hasn't come out of our mouth since 2020 and the pandemic. So there's been a lot of uncertain times as it relates to government funding and things like that in the funding space. But we tend to serve either small nonprofits that maybe need a strategic plan, a fundraising roadmap, or those larger scale nonprofits that are going through a bit of staff turnover. And so what's happening is the staff are turning over every 16 months, especially in the development space, or they can't find talent out there. So we're able to kind of do some staff augmentation. So we're essentially an outsourced development team for nonprofit organizations from small to large.
Gotcha. So let me tell you, before we get into today's topic, we've noticed a slowdown in our business. So, with the lines of credit that we provide to clients, which is a little bit surprising. And I have some theories, but I want to hear from you on the outside, the inside of what's going on out there. So both people are not opening up lines of credit right now for nonprofits, which is highly irregular for us for the last several years. And the people who do have lines of credit are using it less than they used to. So my theory on this, because after I've done some reading on what's going on, I mean, I know it, of course, of what's going on, but my idea is that organizations, nonprofits tend to do such a good job with budgeting. And believe me, most nonprofits think that they want to be businesses and
right.
or run like a business. Let me say that.
Correct.
Right. But the fact of the matter is, you should know that businesses are horrible at budgeting, and nonprofits are really good at it.
I
They
agree
are
with that.
they're
Yep.
excellent. So I think nonprofits always put themselves down, and they shouldn't. And this is
Mhm.
one area of budgeting that they do a really good job with. So my guess is this uncertainty in the market has because of the administration that's sending a lot of mixed signals, sending signals in some cases, depending on the industry, that everybody is pulled back and they're not taking any chances with their organization. Is that fair to say?
I think that there's a combination of things that are happening, Stephen, and a couple things, right? I do agree. I always, one of the things that we always say in our business when we're working with clients is just because you are a 501c3 status, that's a tax status, not necessarily you're not supposed to run like a no profit organization. And so it's a matter of I do believe that the budgeting is hugely what a kudos to them, but they do a significant they're legs ahead of other organizations in the way they're budgeting. I think that at the end of the day, what's happening in the financial sector, and I'll tell you, I come from a finance background, so I'm very familiar with the space. Love to talk to you on the back end on some of the things you're up to and doing. But I think that right now, higher interest rates are just squeezing everyone. I think nonprofits are not absolved from that. And the cost of borrowing right now is significantly higher right now. So it's a matter of, that's one thing. And they're normally already playing it safe. So nonprofits are already playing it safe with the higher interest rates that are happening right now. That's no different for them, right, than it is for a regular business. I will also say is, one of the things that I think the budget cushion of what's happening right now for nonprofit organizations is that they cannot fill the positions that they're trying to recruit from. So then essentially your budget is having you're cushioned in the sense of you have budgeted for maybe an FTE full-time employee position over the last year. Happens significantly with our clients. They're at capacity and they have a couple of lines, employee lines that they're looking to fill, and frankly they just can't fill them, right? So you have these jobs that are maybe 70, 80, 100K, and you're budgeted for this year. And so if you're not filling them, well, you're using that cushion for something else, right? And so this is my prediction of what's happening as well, is that the market itself is not filling those roles for the nonprofit organizations, and therefore they have a little bit extra funding to be used if they can't fill a position. Right now, I will also say that there's a level, I think they're holding tight because there's a level of uncertain revenue projections right now. You have left and right. You mentioned about the administration. It's no surprise that this spring, when budgets came in, there was a number of our clients that were affected that were supposed to get federal funding
Yeah.
in March, and they had already, frankly, those dollars were already spent last year, and so now they had to, from the national parks to incredible organizations that are doing work around farm workers, right? These are organizations that have already spent those funds and unfortunately now are having to think about, well, how am I going to reposition my team? Because the way they pay for their teams is through those grant funding. So I think those tighter budgets or uncertain revenue projections and where that's coming next is what's causing some of these lending habits to occur. And I think it speaks volumes to you being able to diversify the revenue streams that you in the organization. You can't be too highly reliant on one source of revenue. It's a de-risking model at the end of the day, right? Just like I would advise a regular business. We do have for-profit business in our lines of work. As I would advise a regular business that they're too high on one percentage of a client or type of client. I would advise the nonprofits the same, right? If you're too highly reliant on a government, let's say government funding or private foundation funding, it's time for you to kind of stabilize the reliance on some of your revenue lines so that you can feel a little bit more relief in the way that you're going out for funding.
Yeah, and listen, I think if I were to give one word of advice in regards to strategic planning, is use this time wisely. I mean, I know as long as you're not putting fires out, right? But if you can use this time wisely to say, where do I want this organization to be, or nonprofit to be, a year from now or 3 years from now, use this time to say, because that's what happens in recessions
Correct.
and turmoil in your business. You then say, oh, again, if you're putting out fires, that's a different story. But if you have this time, you need to say, okay, there's a slowdown going on right now. Where do I want to be from a year and from now or 3 years from now? I mean, what made me think of that is when you talk about diversifying, revenue. And today, we're going to be talking about breaking the restricted cycle, 3 game-changing approaches every nonprofit should know about. It's something for several years that, we've talked about often on this podcast about asking for funds to be used for unrestricted, because people are afraid to do that. And I think, I've been a proponent on saying that your donors are often business people.
Correct.
And understand that you need to run the organization to be able to help your causes. So let's jump into the topic a little bit about breaking the restriction cycle. And, what is your view on all this?
I think there's so many ways to take it. I think that what happens, this restricted cycle is it's a very traditional way of fundraising, right? You're talking about you're applying for grants on a yearly basis. Sometimes I see nonprofits are not partnering with others and they're maybe they're not staying in their lane of what they're trying to serve, right? So I noticed, like, for example, you're talking about the nonprofits that receive the most funding on a yearly basis, right? Are normally the nonprofits that are covering basic needs for humans, right? That's normally the ones that are receiving the most funding and the most funds. And so that kind of trickles down to education, youth programming type, right? Shelter, housing. Those are normally the topics that we're looking at. What I notice is that there's not a lot of nonprofits that are co-creating solutions together.
Yeah.
They're kind of cannibalizing the market in their lane and not co-creating solutions together. They're just trying to go after. They see a big private foundation that's doing funding, and even though they don't have the program, they're creating it out of thin air versus kind of leveraging a partner that maybe is in your regional geographic area that you can partner with. Yet you can frankly ask for more money because it's 2 entities now going for funding instead of one. So I do think that there's an opportunity here is how you do that strategic support. Number one, as one of the tactics of how you approach this, is how you do that strategic support of trying to see how you can co-create with other partners. But more importantly, how are you data storytelling? I think there's a lot of lack of data storytelling. So I say storytellings exist, but I think that there's a lot of habits of, if you have a backpack distribution before back to school, you're saying we provided over 1,000 backpacks to the following, kids, and this impacted. Well, I'm gonna be a little bit bold here, Stephen, and say, well, so what? What does 1,000 backpacks do for that family? What's the long line of what that looks like? What's that economic ripple effect that happens for that family? Like, let's get a little bit deeper into the type of impact that you're trying to do. And so I do think there's a combination of working that data storytelling approach with the co-creating, with the partnerships. And that would be my first thing, is how we are emphasizing storytelling, clean data, because a lot of people complain about their CRM systems and the data not being accurate. But that is what increases donor confidence in helping you, ask for general support and not just specific program support. So that's my first point. Would love to share your thoughts on those things.
I like what you're saying, because I remember during COVID in 2021, how that was a recommendation for organizations that did something similar to combine with other organizations to survive through COVID. And so it seems that, now with a downturn in this industry, let's put it that way, that either partnering or looking back at strategically combining. But when I look at data use data. It wasn't results, but data. What was the word you termed it as?
Data storytelling.
Data storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I love it because I think in order to be able to be the best at what you do, to be the benchmark at the cause that you're doing, you need to be able to prove results.
Correct.
And by proving results, not only does it mean that you are doing a great job at delivering what you say you're delivering for your constituents, but you're also able to probably win a lot more grants because that's what they're looking for.
That's
right.
correct.
So like I'll give you an example. Like when you use the backpack example,
Mm-hmm.
and I was involved personally on the board of a nonprofit that was similar to something like that. Some of the things that would come out of that I would think of is what percentage of those people are under the poverty line?
Correct.
Right? I mean, it's hard to say, well, these people wouldn't have been able to get a backpack, but certainly that could point to it to me.
Right.
Right. What percentage of those people are in underserved communities?
Mm-hmm.
What other, so the data points there would be important for me. What other, like in this case that you mentioned, are there other data points that I would have missed?
So, for example, one of the things of just kind of showcasing comparison outcomes, right? So, I share this with you because when we're working with nonprofit organizations, we're working to frame their pitch decks, their annual appeals, their case statements, all that kind of stuff. And one of the examples that I shared is around one of the orgs that we serve, Teach for America. Well, one of the interesting things about Teach for America that a lot of people have known. It's an organization that existed for over 35 years, right? They have a milestone birthday and everything else. And interestingly enough, Teach for America teachers, right? Normally they're placed in Title I schools. They're normally placed in schools that really need more support, right? In the type of teachers. But here's the thing. A lot of the metrics and what you're trying to uncover, right? That I'm here like as a parent, right? And I'm sure parents would be like, oh my goodness, I want to Teach for America teacher, right? The metrics were showing specifically in Florida that the Teach for America teachers that were trained by Teach for America were outperforming the overall school metrics that they were placed in, and two, were outperforming just non-Teach for America teachers, right? Meaning that there's the scores of the students and the grades and their academic output that was happening were way beyond their peers in other classrooms. And I say that because, who as a parent, as an educator, wouldn't want their student to have the best teacher in the classroom, right? And so that to me says, as a funder, I immediately told, one of the executive directors here, I said, we need to push that information out. We need to talk about that with funders. We need to share that to the point that other people need to, put pressure almost on the schools and the district to say, we want to make sure that whatever training model Teach for America is doing, we're replicating, and how can we get more of that in here, right? So that there's consistent support across the board. That's the type of data storytelling I'm talking about, where you're able to kind of do that comparison, or you're able to almost pull. One of the exercises that I always give our clients is, can we pull it away from if your organization didn't exist, right? What would be the impact ramifications if it didn't exist? How many people wouldn't be served? What all those things to kind of have them think about that impact that they have into the community. But what an incredible case for support in that particular case for funders to really understand the breadth of the impact that you're having every day in and day out. So those are the type of data points.
Yeah, and I think that if you move your organization to a data-driven results, that sounds a little aggressive. I get it, but organization.
I get it. No, I'm here.
I'm a businessman, so I'm a little bit more. I'm a little bit more data. I'm a little bit more results type of down to the point. But what I would do is have a web page on your website that is updated a lot. It's easy to do. It really is, and have all the data points. And I think that would move your organization into a different culture of we are very well run, proven, results oriented, and data driven. And I think by constantly talking to those numbers with your employees as the executive director, you are now creating a culture that is problem solving and more, a little bit more data driven, which I think just only helps your organization, right?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I just think that, for example, there was a time before the pandemic, and I think that there's an opportunity here. I love mixing the private sector with the public sector, and specifically in nonprofit organizations. And as a finance guy, I'm sure you'll appreciate this, but especially being data driven, we had a donor and a funder come to one of our clients and wanted to do something like almost essentially a social impact bond, in the sense of being able to fund the organization and have a ceiling of like the type of funding. Let's say it was over $1 million, right? But there was metrics that they were hitting, consistently hitting impact metrics to move the needle. So say for this instance, it was students' performance in the classroom. If that was the type of nonprofit that you were running, these were the pieces, right? We were kind of hitting these metrics. We would take the baseline, you hit the metrics, it unlocks, a partial funding for that investor or that donor, right? And then they would hit those metrics consistently, but there was an open conversation about what those metrics were. There was an open conversation of like when that couldn't be hit, right? And what the data was showing, right? But I love the thought of the transparency kind of framework that's on a website, and you're kind of sharing what you're working towards, right? I think gone are the days of these annual reports at the end of the year where you have a donor roll. Nobody cares to have their name on the magazine, right? We want to understand what the impact is being had. And this kind of comes into that second point of this, how do we unlock some more of these unrestricted funds? Before we data storytell, we got to pull back and we got to leverage the fundraising operations that exist to surface the missed opportunities, right? And what I mean by that is how we start really auditing our fundraising and our CRM optimization. You can't make an ask for unrestricted dollars if you're not clear on your donor behavior, the segmentation, or their life cycle, right? You need to be very hyper focused. You can't just start lumping people together. When I'm not running this business, I'm a marketing professor, and I'm always constantly sharing with my master's students, how are we being very specific on the buyer personas, right? Our donor personas, and what they want, what they don't want, and how are they behaving, right? You can share an example of how you've uncovered some of the hidden gems within your organizations or your programs, right? For us, as we're data mining on the back end, we've been able to uncover a number of thousands, frankly, of records and potential donors that, frankly, haven't been cultivated in years. And they're, maybe they have consistently been giving lower level dollars, right? Maybe $100, $500 a year, and they just haven't been asked for more. And there's an opportunity there if they're a consistent donor that they have capacity. One, they have willingness because they're showing up consistently for you. But two, they have capacity to give more and kind of move them up that pipeline. So these are some of the other, that's the number two for me that I would share with with your listeners and our clients is how are we being intentional about auditing our fundraising, but more specifically our CRM, so that we're not missing out on opportunities and this gold of some of our pipeline.
Yeah. So today's topic, involved breaking the restriction cycle, 3 game-changing approaches. So was the first approach that you talked about data-driven? That
It
was the
was.
first?
So that first approach was a combination of how are we strategically planning, maybe being able to add capacity with partnering with another organization, plus how are we tying in that data? It's like a 1.2. How are we diving into the data storytelling? And that second one that I'm talking about is about how are we specifically auditing our CRM to optimize and understand the trends that are happening. Because before we do data storytelling and we can partner with anyone, we got to understand our house and we got to understand what our data is saying. So that would be number 2. Yeah.
And number 3 would be?
So number 3 with me would be how are we catering to your donor engagement strategy and how are we impact communicating? So this is a matter of how are we meeting our donors where they're at, and we're in the stewardship of everything, right? So how are we creating a culture of transparency, long-term partnerships with our donor by specifically catering to them the way they want to be catered to in a stewardship approach? One of the things I'm consistently seeing is that too many organizations overpromise with restricted funds. So nonprofits tend to overpromise what they can do with restricted funds and underreport on their strategic wins. So it becomes this pool of they're only reporting once a year because that grant is the only vehicle. You should be communicating with your donors on a quarterly basis, if not more, right? Quarterly basis is at least the minimum, but more importantly is how are we thinking about building not just the annual reports or the donor reports, but we're telling that story clearly that not only justifies the unrestricted support that's needed, but increases the donor retention. I can't begin to tell you how many times organizations feel shame to share their troubles with their funders, right? Capacity troubles, money troubles, program, staffing up for program troubles, impact. And so there's times where, I've encouraged candid conversations with your funders and say, we said that we were able to do this in this grant last year, but these are the realities of right now and today. And so I'd love to take these funds, and this is where I think the greater purpose will be, right? Versus just try to perform what's happening in the current grant. And I do think that funders are better equipped to say, absolutely, let's adjust, or can we kind of try to work and co-create a new scope of work for that restricted piece, versus trying to have them perform and then frankly under deliver what they said that we're going to do, right? They wait too long to do that. The second point on the stewardship side of when you're having a donor conversation is how are we thinking about, not all of your funders want to be invited to all the events that you're doing. Imagine they're funding everybody else too, so they can't be invited to 100 different events. How are you meeting them where they're at, right? How are we thinking about just beyond the thank you letters and the emails and the acknowledgement letters? We're really, frankly, picking up the phone. I have our CEOs or our executive directors be very intentional about cultivation and their stewardship of their funders. And sometimes, can you be casual with it? Can you send your funder a voice note and say, I have a great win for you based on this program. These are some of the things that are going to be doing. I'd like your advice about this, so that you're not only talking to them when you're asking them for money. Like, who wants to be approached only when they're being asked for money? They want to build a relationship. So building the relationship, that stewardship piece is the key to frankly building a rapport with the individual so that you can then ask for exactly what you need and not just for a program.
So let's go over a case study. I love case studies, and I'll make this one personal.
Mm-hmm.
It's perplexing to me. So as some of our listeners know, 3.5 years ago, my wife passed away unexpectedly. And so I at the time, I have 2 sons, but my one son was 12. My other one was 21.
Mm.
The 21-year-old's at college. So it wasn't, he's 21. It wasn't I wasn't as concerned with him as I was with my 12-year-old. So both he and I went to a grief nonprofit that specialized in families. It's about an $8 million nonprofit. And I certainly really liked and appreciated it. And it was extremely valuable for both me, my son and I, the therapy we got, group therapy. and then I volunteered to join their fundraising team, and I raised $15,000. And again, this is not about me; it's about a case study.
Sure.
And I donated $7,000 out above that $15,000. No, that, just to be clear, that $7,000 was, and I also brought 8 people to their yearly event, a fundraising event, who donated money themselves, and I'm not including that in the money that I raised. So I never got a thank you, which is not uncommon, right?
That's awful.
I never got a thank you, and I never got. Now, I'm well off financially. I've never gotten a call from them to say, forget about the idea that they didn't thank me, which bugs me, of course. But above that, I never got a call saying, Mr. Halasnik, we would love to tell you a little bit more about what Good Grief does. And I was very involved. I mean, I used to go to a lot of their lectures and their clinics and
Sure.
Stuff like that. So my question to you is, why not forget about the thank you? That's different. Why haven't they called me? Why haven't they asked for more money? Why haven't they asked for more involvement? My guess is, from what I've seen from this organization, again, this is an $8 million organization. I found them sometimes to be a little inept. But the other thing is, I think their thought process could be here is they don't have enough staff to target me.
Yeah, that breaks my heart, Stephen, because it's just like it's so basic to just pick up the phone and thank someone for their donation, to acknowledge that they donated. And so that's frankly such a fundraising faux pas in the sense of what you should not be doing.
I've heard it for 6 years. I've heard that, thanking and this is firsthand that I've seen it, so I kind of know what it's like. But again, this is a little bit more about the idea that, why aren't they reaching out to me to ask for more money?
I know. It could be a combination of things. I think the first thing that I think about is they're not looking at their data. That's my first assumption. They're just not. They're not. And if they are, they're looking at it too late. So maybe they did see you, they did see that you donated, and they're like, oh my goodness, it's been so long. And instead of just kind of owning it, and I think you seem like a straight shooter. So if they owned it and they picked up the phone and called you and said, I'm so sorry that we haven't called you sooner, but we just noticed all of this momentum, and we just want to thank you. I'm sure you'd appreciate that than nothing. But I will say, I don't think that, this is my assumption. They're looking at their data. They're not looking at it often. And here's where I'm going to just be very clear in my approach and in my thought process is, you having little capacity on your team is no excuse on this end. There are incredible tools for automation of this, Stephen, and these are the things of like and so it's funny, you mentioned earlier in the segment about strategic planning, about a year from now where you want to be. We take the approach of taking a look at 90-day segments, quarters, because frankly, as you know, things are changing so fast. And in quarters, things need to change. On a quarterly basis, hell, on a monthly basis, you should be looking at who are the incoming donors that are coming in, what levels are they coming in at. I mean, and the fact that, these are all the things that I immediately think about is, you've been involved, you went to these sessions, so you were already engaged, you had a personal story of what has happened, right? So immediately that flags for me a highly engaged person, parent that has experienced our services. And then on top of that, you were fundraising for them. And so I do think that these are little steps that if you had automation, if you had an opportunity to dive into the data and the automation inside of your CRM, this wouldn't be missed, right? Certainly by the leader of the organization should be looking at your data dashboards on a weekly basis, just like a business CEO does, right? Where are things at? Who has given money? Should be prompted by the staff to know, hey, Stephen has come to now 3 events and has now given this amount. This is an opportunity to kind of unlock and say, you need to pick up the phone and call Stephen, right?
Yeah, I think I agree with you, and I think sometimes if I was running that organization, I would look at that. There's usually always something called the 80-20 rule, which applies to anything. But I would say, who are the top 20% of the donors that we have, and what else are they capable of using outside data as far as how much, how wealthy they are, and then a personal approach. Stop it with the emails. Just you got to reach out and talk to those people, even if you can do 90-10. Like, so let's take 10% of these people, identify them, put them up on a board, assign them to people, and go in that route. It just seems that, and I hate to say it, but there have been a number of examples with this organization that I personally haven't had involvement with, which shows me that they're inept.
Right.
And no one's going to give money to an inept organization, and I still keep giving them, chances to impress me. And now I believe in what they do. They do a lot of other things.
Sure.
And it's just, I might just slip through the cracks, which I think really is what happens, to be honest with you. I don't think that they really track the money that I raised. I don't think that they knew the involvement that I was involved with as much as I know I was. So, and listen, I'm not doing this to say, oh, please feel sorry for me. I'm not saying this was a case study in looking at restricted and unrestricted funds and a real life scenario. Maybe nonprofits hear this quite a bit. I don't know.
One thing that I will say about this case scenario, because you highlighted a number of great things, and I wanted to point it out to also your audience members. Sometimes organizations, and I realize this because I did some volunteer work for a child grief organization, and they have some kind of internal struggle with asking individuals who've participated in their programs for funding and for money or for more money, which frankly is a missed opportunity in the way that they're involved, because these are frankly champions of the organization that can further the mission. So there might be some of that happening. But something else that you brought up, because I do want levels of stewardship and cultivation of your donors is not just for your higher performing donors. This is very, frankly, it's very old school, and it's not as effective, right? And one of the metrics that you need to be looking at, it's a combination of a person and a donor profile, especially on the individual donor, that is engaged, right? So that means that they're going to your events, your programs, and has that combination of fundraising, because that tells me that this is an individual who's bought in already, right? It's bought in, and maybe it needs to be asked to do a little bit more, right? And they can serve on a board, they can fundraise, whatever it is, but it's not just segmenting your donor data and say, okay, donors above X amount. It's not that. It needs to be a more cohesive scorecard approach of how you're stewarding and you're doing outreach of your donors, like these engagement points, like the example that you shared, so that these folks are not being, they don't go down the cracks, right? They are not being missed, because then that becomes a huge mouthpiece at this point of this type of case study, right? This becomes so many other things that it didn't need to be.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
So we have like a minute or two left. Is there anything you want to leave our audience with?
I think that there's a lot of pieces, and I think that one of the shares that I'd love to share with everyone is this focus on, taking a look and a better approach at your individual donor data. That is the easiest actually pathway to grow your unrestricted funds. Right now, America, it makes up 60% of revenues for majority of the nonprofit organizations as it relates to unrestricted donations. So I would heed the advice of taking a look and focusing a little bit more effort in cultivating individual donors for the unrestricted approach. The second thing is think about how you're strengthening your relationships as it relates to other nonprofit organizations and how we can co-create things so that you can expand your reach. And the last piece is how are we thinking about really investing time, talent, and effort in your data infrastructure in the way that you can be a little bit more forward thinking so that you can do, frankly, more. Your CRM allows you to do more with less, especially if you're having capacity issues. So those are my takeaways for your audience today. Of course, we're hosting executive forums with funders on a monthly basis. You can find them on our website to register for. It's thewinwoman.com. And again, I appreciate so very much the time and efforts for your audience and for you, Stephen. Thanks for inviting me to be on here.
Thanks, Yanni. It was a very interesting conversation, and I appreciate you coming on as well. So just to wrap everything up, if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend, and also send it subscribe to your favorite podcasts. We have so many great guests on this show, and they're so helpful to me. 35 minutes is typically the length of this, and if you can listen to a podcast once every 2 weeks, that's the purpose. The Nonprofit MBA is about really getting very much educated, much more educated about how to run, or getting good ideas about how to run a great organization. So also, if you like today's podcast or any of the other ones that we've done, please give us a 5-star rating. It helps us get the word out. And I want to thank you all for listening today. I just want to remind everybody that there's a lot of burnout that goes on in this industry, and you have to do a really good job of remembering that this is a marathon to solve world problems, and it's not a sprint. And so you really need to take good care of yourself. And I think we all know what that means. The number one most important thing is for you to remember every day that you need to take care of yourself first before you help your employees, your cause, your family. You need to take care of yourself first. So think about what you need to do every day. I mean, for me personally, I need to exercise every day. That's what keeps me sane. So whatever you need to do, if it's meditation, prayers, exercise, reading a book, make sure you're doing that for yourself. You deserve it. Other than that, thanks for listening to the Nonprofit MBA podcast, and we'll see you on the next show.